Good afternoon to Madam Norzilah and my classmate. I'm Yong. My metric number is 263-178. We are from Group 3I and we are going to present 14.4, which is Foreign Aid, the Development Assistance Debate, and 14.5, Conflict and Development. I will start with why donors give aid. First, let us look at the introduction. Foreign aid has been around in its present form since World War II. In 1992, the United Nations claims that ODA, which is Official Development Assistance, allocation is strange and arbitrary, and ODA is determined not by the needs of developing countries, but by the fluctuating goodwills of the people and their parliament in the rich countries. As a result, it is largely ad hoc and unpredictable. This statement cannot, however, explain why Africa is consistently the world's most aided region. Something about African countries continually appeals to the donor countries, meaning that ODA allocation is not as strange and arbitrary as the United Nations claim. This begs the question, what motivates donor countries to give aid to countries in Africa? Now, let us look at the literature review. There are three general theories of donor motivations that researchers acknowledge as possible explanation for their findings. There are the idealist, realist, and neo-realist explanation, and they are all widely supported by empirical research. These theories provide not only explanation for why government choose certain recipient countries, but they are also justification that government use to earn their citizens' support for their policy choices. Now, let us look at the first theory, which is idealist theory. Idealist theory posits that government use aid to promote humanitarian concerns. Idealist scholars are optimistic about foreign aid's ability to solve the problem of third world poverty and underdevelopment. Thus, this theory also asserts that donors may give foreign aid to support the spread of democracy and human rights. In short, idealists believe foreign aid is based on humanitarian needs. Many researchers in the field have come to the similar conclusion that countries with lower income on a per capita basis receive more aid than middle-income countries. A conclusion from a textbook on economics states that the donors use the foreign aid in ways that favor the poorest countries over the middle-income countries. These findings strongly suggest that donor countries give foreign aid based on humanitarian needs. The second theory is realist theory. Realist theory contrasts sharply with the idealist theory and was widely accepted towards the end of the Cold War. Realists believe that foreign aid policies are made with strategic concerns in mind, such as national security and self-preservation. Thus, foreign aid is perceived as only minimally related to the recipient economic development, and the humanitarian needs of recipient countries are downplayed. Realist scholars expect countries with the most humanitarian need to be passed over by the donors country if the recipient countries cannot also provide significant alliances and military aid. Scarded et al. Cite R.D. McKinley and their own Steve Hook as the founder of research supporting the realist theory. In his research, McKinley concluded that the humanitarian theory, through providing a simple moral relationship between donors and aid, is flawed. His research showed that France and America, more than any other countries, base their donations on national interests. He finds, for example, that America's role as a global superpower concern about security is reflected in its aid donation. Steve Hook also argued that foreign aid is given purely out of national interest. Next, neo-realist theory. The neo-realist theory is the third general theory that is widely accepted by a researcher in the field. It is an evolved form of the realist explanation. National interests still form the basis of foreign aid, but the focus shifts from national security and self-preservation to economic interests. Neo-realists argue that a donor country use aid in ways that promote their economic interests. Thus, donors will give more aid to the countries that have the most to offer them by way of export, access to raw materials, and industrial competitiveness. In short, donors countries give foreign aid to create export and investment opportunities, particularly in largest countries that offer large markets to the donor countries' firms. That's all from me, and I'll pass it to my friend.
Hi everyone, my name is Alchiji and my metro number is 26121. I will continue with why the recipient country accept the aid. The major reason is economy. Developing countries have often tend to accept the proposition by the developed country economies and support by the reference to success stories such as Taiwan and South Korea. To the exclusion, the various aid is a crucial and essential ingredient in the development process. The first reason is conflict arise. That is not because the disagree of the role of aid, but its amount and condition. For example, developing countries want more aid in the long-term direct or indirect loans with the minimum loans. So this means not trying aid to the exploit for donors and given great freedom to the recipient country that to decide for themselves what is more profitable for their long-term development. Next, as seen as giving greater political influence to the excusing leadership to exercise the opposition and return power. In some cases, it is not only in the form of the transfer of the financial resources but also strengthening military and internal security. The problem is, when the aid is received, the ability of the recipient government to escape from the implicit political and economic obligation of the donor and to present the donor government from the internal effect can be reduced. The last reason is the basic human responsibility policy of the rich throughout the well-being for the poor due the belief that the rich country own preparation to poor country for past exploitation. That belief the rich country have an obligation to support economic and social development, especially in the less developed country. They often encourage this moral obligation with the need of the greater freedom of choice of the recipient of the developing country in the allocation and use of aid funds. Next is the role of NGO in aid. NGO are cooperating organizations that work together and on behalf of most local grassroots organizations in developing countries. They also represent local and international interest groups with diverse concerns such as providing emergency aid, protecting children's health, promoting women's rights, elevating poverty, protecting the environment, increasing the food production, and providing rubric credit to smallholders and local business. NGO also build the road, house, hospital, and the school. They work in the family planning clinic and refugee camp. They also teach in the school and university and do the research on improving the farm rails. We can see some well-known NGOs that include the Save the Children, Care, Oxfam, Planet Parenthood, Doctor Without Border, and the World Vision. They have two advantages here. The first one is less considered by the political need. NGOs are able to work more effectively locally with the people they are trying to help from the last bilateral and the multilateral aid program. The next is NGOs are better able to avoid the subsidy and the clemency to the pro they serve because their help is not received or may be short-lived. For example, the role of NGO in the human conflict in Palestine. Seeing the conflict going in the Palestine and no action being taken by the big country, the NGO from the region country with the aim for carrying out the various humanitarian activities here. The NGO participate in the global politics through a number of ways to raise the public awareness of the environment issue, the lobby this decision-making country to influence the establishment of domestic and foreign policy. It also continued boycott in the effort to change harmful corporate practice and participate in international cooperation and assist in monitoring and implementing the international agreement. For example, the representation of the NGO as a voice of the universal human rights can be reflected trend in influence the formulation of policy and development within the UN and the World Bank. So the NGO are committed to promoting the principle throughout the international system and successful providing the awareness to fight for the human rights. The effect of acts. They have positive relationship between the foreign and the aid the development. Also have negative. In positive, we can see the good economic policy is the prerequisite of the effectiveness of aid. The view has been challenged by the many who find that the aid is efficient even the independent of policy. In general, aid has been found to have a positive impact on economic growth through a number of mechanisms. That is, as increase the investment, increase the capacity of to the import capital good or technology, does not have any adverse impact on the investment and saving, and also increase the capital productivity and promote the endogenous technical change. And also successful in reducing poverty and promoting growth in the many countries as a result. Through aid flow does not drive goes in the circular, they on average have the positive effect. That because combined effect among acts and the policy are successful because in the good policy environments, either the function in the invested as or the resulting increase the improvement is largest. For the negative, there is the first one due to the volatile nature of aid. The government of the recipient country is sometimes unable to mobilize the amount of the aid in the timely manner of the and fail to convince donors that its remaining funds will spent efficiently. Therefore, the withdrawal of the aid was delayed. Hidden inability of the government spending, so the conditions are problem related for the foreign aid that critiques the economic development of the received country. Next is the capacity has been a major constraint. That is the donor relationship asymmetric influence the strong and weak parties. Where is the structure of the political and the economic domination and exploitation leave little room for them to choose. If the aid is tied at the same point during the negotiation, so the donor begins with the high ability. In fact, the foreign aid generally benefits the powerful elite and the top of management of the NGOs. Therefore, the main goal of the foreign aid cannot be achieved, but lack of commitment and accountability of the recipient country is also a reason of disrupt economic growth. So the authoritative has description over how foreign aid is used and distribution, since they should not be responsible to someone. Sometimes they use the power to seize the resources of help. Sometimes they advertise on short-term political interest and the time option for the foreign aid resources. That's all for me. Thank you.
My name is Madihah. My metric number is 265066. I'm going to elaborate about the scope of violent conflicts and conflicts arise. First, we need to know what is physical security. Physical security is the foundation of human capability. It is an assurance for security, and it is the most fundamental for all institutions for development. What is conflict risk? If the conflict such as war happen in our country, our economy might be harmed. Second, we have the discourage of investment happen in our country. Third, brain drain will happen and entrepreneurship will be less. People, investor from outside will not be able to invest in our country if the conflicts happen. When the conflicts happen, the cost of foreign conflict is very high. So it is important for us to prevent conflict from happen. If to overcome the situation, it will be the recovery effort. First, the housing and infrastructure will be destroyed completely in our country, and our environmental will decay, and our health and education will collapse. We also have the lack of service and assist traumatized victims, and lastly we'll have a loss of social capital. Proceed to the consequence of the conflicts. First, children are forced to work. When the conflicts such as war happen, children are going to miss out their schooling, and parents will lose their job and their living livelihood and become refugees. Our conflict will harm children well-being over a lifetime. There are so many consequences that will harm our children future. I will proceed with the consequence of armed conflicts. The examples of armed conflicts is war, and I'm going to elaborate in the two terms, in terms of health and destructions of wealth. The first consequence is more men are going to die than women. We are commonly known that in military, mostly army consists with the men, much bigger. The ratio is much bigger than the woman, and it is the main reason why men are going to die than women. The second is there will be a long-term effect on the women because it will diminishing their access, women access to the health, social welfare service and education. And that is rape. It is a very common scenario that will happen when war happen in their country, because men and children are weak, and it will expose them to the rape because they are not capable to defend themselves. And chronic disease also will occur in the war country during the war, because AIDS, the chronic depression and infection disease, the chronic depression because the citizens are traumatized by the war. They are losing their house, they are losing their job, and their children's commonly their children are not going to school. And infection disease will happen too, because such as the infection disease like skin disease, diarrhea disease, because we are lack in a clean water supply, and there are no health center, that proper health center that will overcome this situation. And public health program are not going to be funded because mostly the capital are going to the military, and children's also affected by this war, because this armed conflict, because children are going to lack in nutrition and no clean water, no good food, no food supplies are going to be less and less. And in terms of destructions of wealth, first, our capital, our country are going to get destroyed because of the war. There'll be the additional wealth also shifted abroad, because the investment in the investor are going to protect their wealth, so they will ship their wealth to the abroad, away from the war that has the country away from the country that has been war in it. And the country was also transferred abroad between the beginning and the ending of your conflict, because largely largely as a capital flight. And the best example is the total economic cost in the conflicts of Sri Lanka between 1983 and 1996 amounted to be 4.2 billion, twice the country's GDP. It is shown that the truth in the cost of recovering effects are going to be high than the uh, prevention uh, preventions of the conflicts happen. That's all.
I will continue the consequence of armed conflict. Next is armed conflict worsening hunger and poverty. In many conflict countries, food production drops. The International Food Policy Research Institute found that In conflict and post-conflict countries, more than 20% of the population usually lacks access to adequate food. Hunger is also a weapon of war. Fighters have cut off food supplies and attempted to starve opposing population into submission. Poverty increases through declines in opportunities to earn income, but also through direct outcomes of fighting. Killing or driving of farm animals is a weapon of war. When people, many of them very poor, are forced to flee their village, their land is typically occupied, often by the forces that drove them out. In the aftermath of conflict, affected areas may be slow to recover for reasons ranging from lack of working capital to poisoned resource and the dangers of landmines. Institutions to resolve property dispute may be dysfunctional and never are established. Lost education is also the consequence of armed conflict. IMF found that during the conflict, education spending fell at a rate of -4.3% per person per year in conflict countries. This is because children cannot risk the walk to school because of the danger of violence. Moreover, both government soldiers and rebels have destroyed schools that symbolize the hopes of a village. Many children work long hours instead getting a proper education and under condition of lawlessness and impunity, trafficking and kidnapping into sex slavery, child soldering, and other abhorrent conditions that have been documented. Lastly, a torn social fabric happens during armed conflict. Violent conflict or its imminent threats creates ravages. One estimate is an additional 64 ravages per 1,000 people on average from a civil war, 45 per 1,000 from coups, and 30 per 1,000 from guerrilla warfare. According to the United Nations, by the end of 2008, there were about 26 million internally displaced persons due to conflict, generalized violence, or human rights violations. The impact of civil war is often felt over a period of many years and hundreds of miles away, well beyond borders countries. Civil war that happened in Colombia and many other countries have provided an opportunity for drug gangs to carve out territory with impunity and often to form unholy alliances with either rebel or government forces. I will continue on the causes of armed conflict and risk factors for conflict. Conflict is more common in countries with low income, slow growth, medium to large population, significant oil production, poor institutions, a large percentage of excluded ethnic minorities, severe stress on basic resources, and opportunities to profit from high-value commodities for export. Most places that are diverse ethnically or in other ways do not have violent conflict, and places with high inequalities across individuals usually do not have violent conflict. First causes is the horizontal inequalities. Francis Stewart proposed that the presence of major horizontal inequalities or inequalities among cultural different groups significantly raises the risk of conflict. She argues that when cultural differences coincide with economic and political differences between groups, this can cause deep resentment that may lead to violent struggles. It is a combination of cultural differences and political and economic inequalities running along cultural lines that, in part at least, explain contemporary violent conflict. Where there are both socio-economic and political horizontal inequalities in the same direction, that conflict is most likely. Conversely, where one group has political power and another is an economical privilege, or government are broadly inclusive, conflict seems to be less likely. Next is natural resource for basic needs. Basic needs resource scarcity, especially shortage of food, fertile land, and water, may contribute to conflict or ongoing risk of conflict. Scarcity can increase the risk of violent conflict and cites quantitative studies that suggest that population size and density are significant conflict risk factors. Countries that are highly dependent on natural resources, as well as those experiencing high rates of deforestation and soil degradation or low per capita availability for arable land and fresh water, have higher risk of conflict. But low rainfall may matter primarily because it leads to lower growth, particularly in agricultural economies. Climate change may exacerbate existing problems. Lastly, struggle to control exportable natural resources. The presence of high-value exportable resources such as diamonds, oil and hardwood without accepted or enforceable rules for how their benefits will be distributed also appears to be an underlying factor in violent conflict. Countries are prone to civil war when faced with low income, slow growth, and dependence on primary commodity exports. Resources that are not usually thought of as exportable may be becoming more so. As water grows scarcer, Greece's current problem of receding shoreline of inland bodies of water, aquifer depletion, salination, and projected future problems due to climate change, the price of water is rising, and in response, export of water are beginning.
Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. My name is Muhammad Ridwan Said, and my mature number is 249894. Today I'm going to present about the summary of our presentation, which is the resolution and prevention of armed conflict. The process of conflict management is the foundation for more effective conflict resolution. A distinction between conflict management and conflict resolution is, however, needed as a starting point, as the concept often are confused or integrated in an inappropriate manner. Conflict resolution refers to the resolution of the underlying incompletes in a conflict and mutual acceptance of party existence, while conflict management refers to measure the limit, mitigate, and or contain a conflict without necessary or solving it. Conflict resolution. Armed conflict resolution can be both formal and informal. It can be either the aim at resolving or terminating conflict in an open and predictable process, in accordance with the illegal principle or focus on. The final aim of resolving the armed conflict is, however, shared by the both perspectives regardless of process. A number of scholars, especially from non-Western societies, have argued that the conflict management is a successful tool for resolving armed conflict over a longer time period, and that's created the foundation for effective armed conflict resolution. That's all for my presentation, and thank you so much for watching it.